Forward TV. The world is thinking.
I said a moment ago, this is our first event in the Spring 2009 series, and we're thrilled that the critic extraordinary, Gary Giddins, is here with us. Gary is, in case you don't know, one of the foremost jazz critics in the country. In 1973, he joined the Village Voice, and a year later he introduced his column, Weatherbird, which he ended in December 2003 after an astonishing 30-year run where he received international recognition and won several prizes, including an unparalleled 6 ASCAP Deems Taylor Awards for Excellence in Music Criticism. In addition to The Voice, Gary's writing has appeared in, I'll have to take a breath for this, a variety of publications, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, Esquire, The Atlantic, Grand Street, The Nation, The Times Literary Supplement, Film Comment, Jazz Times, and many, many other publications. Gary's written a number of books, including Natural Selection, Gary Giddins on Comedy, Film, Music, and Books, Satchmo, The Genius of Louis Armstrong, and Bing Crosby, A Pocketful of Dreams. In 1998, his book Visions of Jazz won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism, which was the first time a work on jazz won a major American literary prize. And while I'm on awards, he's also been the recipient of a Peabody Award for writing the PBS documentary John Hammond from Bessie Smith to Bruce Springsteen, and a Grammy for his notes to Sinatra, The Voice. His textbook, Jazz, will be published this month, followed by a trade edition, I learned this evening, in September, which he's quite jazzed about, and a collection of film essays called Warning Shadows is going to be published in 2010, finally, and I'll get out of your way. We're thrilled to have Gary currently on faculty here at the Graduate Center, where in addition to teaching, he's been conducting public conversations like this. This is the 4th one of these. His previous interlocutors have included Sonny Rollins, Cassandra Wilson, and Jason Moran, and we hope that events like this keep happening. Thank you. Gary Giddins.
Thank you. And thanks for coming out. I'll make this brief since Joshua's already out. It's really delightful to have him. He was one of the first people we wanted to have here, and one of the reasons we're able to get him is because he's going to be playing at the High Line Ballroom on the 20th and 21st of next week on West 16th Street. So you really ought to hear him, because this may be the only time you'll get to hear him with the double trio, 2 basses and 2 drummers, which also characterizes, which is also same group that appears on his new album Compass, which is an extraordinary record, and we'll play a few excerpts from that. I first met Joshua in an extraordinary circumstance in 1992. He was just graduated summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, had been offered a chance to study law at Yale, and decided that the real money was in jazz. So he made himself a contestant at the Thelonious Monk competition, and the judges, I don't know how you get to have the nerve for a young musician to play in front of them. It was Benny Carter, Frank West, Jimmy Heath, Branford Marsalis. And I just remember that after Joshua played Second Balcony Jump, Jimmy Heath turned to the other judges and said, "Well, I think we have number 1, so now let's talk about number 2. And from that moment on, he's had a remarkable career. In a couple of weeks, he will be 40 years old. So,
thanks, Gary.
For me, you're still a child. You always will be. Please welcome Joshua Red. I didn't even know it was playing. Okay. Abby Lincoln, how did we get that? See, if my daughter were here, she would show me how to use this damn thing. Okay. It's good to see you again.
Good
the last time I saw you was in Barcelona. It was a couple days after the election. Mm-hmm. So is there a future for mixed race people in this country?
I have to say that for me, I've kind of made a career out of trying to be as apolitical as possible as an artist. Not that I don't have very, very strong political convictions, but I've never seen myself as I don't write or perform music an explicit political or social message in mind. And I think because of that, I've been very reluctant to, as a musician, to make political statements, but I guess all I can say is thank God. And I'm an agnostic, almost an atheist. So, yes, I mean, as an American of African descent and as a American of mixed race, mixed ethnicity, this is hugely important on a symbolic level and a practical level. But for me, it's really first and foremost about the hope, redemption for our country and for the world. So I'm pretty psyched.
Right. In Spain, I met a woman who was with the consulate, the U.S. consulate there, and they had been up all night listening to the election, which was at 5 in the morning there. And I said, you seem as psyched as we are. And she said, are you kidding? Do you know how difficult it is to work in a consulate when the whole world has hated you for 8 years?
Yeah, we when I was on the road in Europe from the end of the middle of October until the beginning of December, and leading up to the election, everybody, every musician I ran into, every concert presenter, the people driving us to and from the airport, everyone was like, "What about the election? What about Obama?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think they took some polls in Europe before the election, and basically, if you could vote, who would you vote for? And it was something like 97%. I mean, just unbelievably lopsided, So.
You have a somewhat similar background.
Even the fascists wanted Obama.
Even the fascists, right, yeah. Your background is somewhat similar. You grew up with a white mother in California.
Yeah.
You said in an interview not too long ago that somebody asked you who your hero was, and you said your mom. Could you talk about that? Because in the jazz world, they always make a big deal about your father, but you weren't raised...
I wasn't raised by my father, although I was raised with his music in the sense that, my mom had all his records, and not just his records as a leader, but also his work with Ornette Coleman and with Keith Jarrett.
We're talking about Dewey Redman, for those of you who don't know.
And there was a great band of, I guess, ex-Ornette sidemen called Old New Dreams, Don Cherry and Ed Blackwell and Charlie Hayden and my father. So, I mean, all those records were around, and my mom played them quite often. So I did grow up with my father's music, but in the same way that I grew up with the music of John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley and Stanley Turrentine and later Sonny Rollins and Dexter Gordon. I mean, my father was one of many great saxophonists and jazz musicians whose music I listened to. But yes, you're right, I didn't, I wasn't raised by him, I was raised by my mom. And she wasn't a musician, she was a dancer, but she was a lover of music and a lover of all the arts. And she never pushed me or even really encouraged me to be a musician or be an artist of any sort. She really, I guess her attitude was just, exposure, like to present me with, or expose me to all, as much interesting and creative art as possible. And she was particularly interested in music that wasn't just from the Western music tradition. So as a dancer, she was really interested in Indonesian dance and Indian, South Indian in particular, dance and African dance. And so, she introduced me to a lot of that music and some Middle Eastern music, as well as jazz, and there were plenty of Beatles records, and so yeah, I mean, my mom was very, you know, I think she kind of tried to take me to as many concerts as possible and let me hear as much music and see as much dance and as possible. But then kind of, you know, it was up to me, you know. And I mean, she never made me practice, which I if I resent her for anything, it's that I wish she had, like, you know, when I was growing up, when you first start playing an instrument in the public schools, if they rent you an instrument, I was able to rent a clarinet from them, and so you have to. There are these little practice cards. I don't know if they still have them, but you know, you've got the days of the week, and you fill in, like, you know, how many minutes you practiced that day, and then your parent signs off on it, and you know. And I used to forge mine, you know, and she would sign off on them. So I'd be like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and she would sign them. And I wish she hadn't. I wish she had made me live up to what I wrote. Because
when you matriculated at Harvard, were you already thinking of a musical career? Or
no, absolutely. I was thinking of anything but a career in music. I mean, I always loved music, and loved it first as a listener, you know. I love music. I loved to listen to music, and I loved what it made me think and the way it made me feel. And I loved to play music as well, but I always thought of myself, and kind of still do think of myself, as a listener first, player second. And music was always, as a player, music was a release for me, because I was very, very focused and very, very disciplined and rigorous in certain areas of my life, in particular with academics, you know. You know, I mean, I was very, very shy, painfully shy kid, and you know, I had friends, but didn't have a great social life. I was basically a nerd, and you know, so I kind of poured my focus into school. Music was a release from that, you know. It was very much kind of you know, it was almost a split existence for a long time, almost a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. So for me, music was kind of like the escape from, you know, the track that I was on. So when I went off to college, I mean, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I was going to go to med school, and then that shifted. You know, I decided I didn't know what I wanted to do, so go to law school. But I never, in that whole time, never once seriously considered a career or a life in music.
But you must have recognized, or other people did, that you had an uncommon facility. Because if there's one characteristic that everyone will agree instantly, it's that you're a virtuoso.
I definitely don't think I'm a virtuoso. I mean, I'm not going to say, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't have any talent for music. I mean, I have some talent for music. But I'm definitely not a virtuoso, and I certainly wasn't a prodigy. I mean, I think my talent for music, and jazz in particular, has been, to a certain extent, is kind of connected with this, connected with the fact that I didn't see it as, I don't want to say that I wasn't serious about it, but that I didn't see it as a career, as a livelihood. For me, music, like I said, was a release. And for me, when I picked up the horn to play, it was an opportunity to express myself in a way that I couldn't in any other aspect of my life. So I think there was, I always viewed improvisation as, I'm in the moment, and I go for it, and I play, you know, without a real agenda, you know, and without saying, okay, well, I've practiced this and this, and now I'm going to play this, or I need to prove this, or, you know, for me, it's always been about just, you know, the most direct, creative, expressive form of communication possible. And I think that if I have any talent in music, it's that I'm in the moment when I play.
How would you define virtuoso?
I would define virtuoso, well, I think typically we think of the more technical aspects of playing an instrument, being able to execute very, very complex whatever, melodic, harmonic, rhythmic ideas, very, very quickly and execute them perfectly. I mean, I have decent...
Part of this, don't you do?
Well, like for example, if you were to... well, first of all, I'm a horrible reader of music. I mean, you can be a virtuoso and not read music well. But if you were to stick a page of music in front of me and say, "Read this," I would, it would be ugly. But even if you were to say, like, if someone were to, say, "Okay, play this," like here it is, even if it wasn't written, like play this, I wouldn't do. I would think I would do. I would be in the, what is it? I'd be below the 50th percentile. I wouldn't, I mean, most musicians would do it as well or better than I, but when I'm improvising, when I'm playing what I'm feeling, I think I have good facility. And there are certain aspects to playing the instrument, playing saxophone, that did come easy for me. I mean, in a certain sense, technical things having to do with like fingers moving and that stuff has kind of come pretty easily.
What about timbre? Because you
really tone is that is not an area in which I feel like I was at all a virtuoso, but it's an area that I worked very, very hard at when I got to New York. So when I was growing up and playing the saxophone, I mean, I didn't see my father very often. I saw him maybe once a year. But at a certain point, he found out that I was playing tenor saxophone. So of course, he made my mom send him a tape. He said, yeah, you sound okay, and but you need to your tone is everything. Practice your long tones. And I was just like, yeah, I ain't gonna do that, like, I mean, I was very much like, oh, that's some old school thing,
Mm-hmm.
like, I didn't want to sit there and just play one note for, 20 minutes. That's boring, So I think that, my ideas progressed way, my ideas were way ahead of my sound. And I think I finally realized that it took me a long time when I got to New York. And I realized that I had a lot to say and was relatively creative as an improviser, but I just didn't have a sound. So that's basically what I practiced from the time I got to New York, for years, just trying to work on my sound, and my sound has changed a lot, and I'm still working on it. But it's not something that came naturally to me at all.
Right. The Hmong competition, did that cement your decision to stick with music, or?
No, not at all. I mean, the competition was a big deal for me in terms of exposure, obviously, and in terms of making connections with other musicians, and getting a foothold in the industry when there was a record industry. But for me, the decision came out of the opportunities that I had to play with the greatest jazz musicians in the world. I mean, within the first 2 years that I was in New York, I had an opportunity to play with my father, with Charlie Hayden, with Billy Higgins, with Roy Haynes, Pat Metheny, Jack DeJohnette, Paul Motian, Elvin Jones, Milt Jackson, McCoy Tyner. I mean, these were like my gods, and it was an opportunity to play with musicians such as those. Plus, my peers are great musicians from my generation, people like Christian McBride and Brad Meldau, Kevin Hayes, Brian Blade, Greg Hutchinson, Bill Stewart. I mean, it's the opportunity to play with these musicians. I realized that this was something that I was very, very fortunate, and this was something that I wanted to.
It's actually a remarkable generation that you're a part of. I don't. The first time you came to the Vanguard, nobody had ever heard of Brian Blade.
Right. I think every generation thinks theirs is particularly remarkable. So, of course, I am partial to many of the musicians from my generation, but that's because I, came up playing with them, and they're my friends and my collaborators. There's great musicians, young musicians I hear every day.
One of the things that I find distinctive about a lot of the musicians in your generation, and especially in your recent work, including this new album, is for a long time the experience of listening to jazz is that there's a guy soloing and then there's a rhythm section backing up, and sometimes you're not really conscious of the bass player. The bass player is playing for the musicians.
Right.
But in your generation, frequently you have to listen to everybody all the time.
Yeah.
And that's very exciting.
Yeah.
But it must also be incredibly tense.
It's a lot of. There always have been in a jazz group, and in particularly in a small jazz group, in a jazz combo, there have always been many, many lines of communication that are happening at one time, and I think, always musicians have had to be aware of those. The pianist and the drummer have to hook up in terms of, the way they're comping, what the rhythms the pianist is playing, and what the drummer's playing on the snare, for example, the non-strict timekeeping aspects. The bassist and the pianist have to hook up harmonically. There's so many different lines of communication that have to be kept open, and a good conversation has to be happening through all those lines, and at the same time it all has to fit together. But I think maybe in the past, even though all those lines of communication were there were still more prescribed roles for each instrument, and it was kind of like your role was given. Okay, bass player, primary responsibility, play the roots of the chords, and keep, play quarter notes, and keep it's the center. Everyone kind of had their role, and especially in terms of what a horn player did. Oftentimes the horn players, either playing the melody, taking a solo, or sitting down on the sidelines, trying to find a reed if you're a saxophonist. And I think a lot of the great horn soloists, you don't hear necessarily in their playing a specific acknowledgement of what the rhythm section is playing. It's more, as you described, Gary, like there's kind of this base upon which the rhythm section provides this incredible foundation. But the great jazz groups, especially those of the '60s, Coltrane's group, and even more so Miles's group and Ornette's group, they kind of really started to rewrite that playbook, and all of a sudden the rhythm section became as important. Their statement was as important and almost as out front as the soloist statement, and the way the soloist played was, it was this kind of collective dance as opposed to like a solid foundation, and then the soloist standing on top. There was this, kind of more spherical interaction, and then that continued. Keith Jarrett's groups of the early '70s really kind of advanced that, and so now jazz today is very much built on that sense of explicit collective interaction.
How much do you control if it's your recording or your piece of music? For example, on the new record, Far Away has this terrific bass ostinato. Is that yours or?
Yeah, yeah. It's all mine.
All yours. Okay.
No, I mean, I will say that, you know, I control as little as possible. The less I control, the better. You know? But yes, I mean, that tune, I mean, it was written, the bass line was one of the first things that were written to that song. So, you know, the bass line exists, and I wrote it, and then Larry Grenadier, the bassist, played it, and then, you know, he, you know, improvised on it, and we take it from there. I mean, you know, the percentage of what we're playing that's written is so minuscule. Even when we're playing the written parts, you know, there's so much improvisation that's happening, even playing the notes on the page.
We've talked a little bit about the difference between what you can achieve in a studio and what live performance is like. And Sonny Rollins is somebody who's just sort of created a line between the two. There's a meditative, occasionally melancholy practice quality about a lot of the things you do in recordings. And then there's this thing that happens in concert where something is, I don't know, unpredictable, and you just seem to be completely carried away by the moment. Right. Do you have a preference for one way or another, and how do you weigh one against the other? Are there two of you?
I hope there's more than two of me. I don't prefer one over the other. But if I had to choose, if I could only do one for the rest of my life, it would be live performance, without a doubt. So if that expresses a preference. I mean, I can't imagine what it means to play jazz and to make jazz music without live performance. It doesn't. It has no meaning to me. Whereas, you know, a lot of great popular music. I mean, you know, you think about, I mean, the Beatles' best work came after they stopped performing live. You know, I can't imagine that happening for a jazz musician. No matter what you do, that feedback loop, that relationship between the musicians and the audience, and I mean, improvised music is music of the moment. It's live. Improvisation is live. You know,
and you're conscious of the audience.
Yes, yes. I mean, you can't not be, especially in jazz, because there's so much, because everything is unwritten. You know, there's so much to be determined. It's one thing if you have, if you've got a piece of music that you're playing from beginning to end, and it's all written out, or if you're, you know, a rock band, you've got your stadium rock band, and you've got your show, and you know it happens the same way every time. Then maybe maybe there can be some advantage to, you know, blocking the audience out to a certain degree. Just, you know, you know what you need to execute, and you execute it. But with jazz, you're conscious of everything, I think.
I want to play something, an excerpt, because some of these pieces are sort of long. I should mention that last year, I'm sure most of you know, Joshua did an extraordinary record called Back East, which is one of the most acclaimed records of recent years by anyone. And this new record, Compass, is kind of a sequel in that it builds on the trio idea, but it's much more personal in that the only standard is by, I won't mention who wrote the standard, maybe we'll play it. But this is a piece that, if I can find it, made me laugh. It makes me laugh every time I listen to it. And I don't think, be inclined to laugh if I didn't know the name of it. It's knowing the name of it that it seems just an extraordinary piece of programmatic composing, and I'm talking about Insomnia.
Oh.
So if you've ever had insomnia, listen to this. Tell us about that piece.
That's the single for the record. I mean, you know, titles always come after the fact for me. I don't know if I've ever written a song where I knew what the title was beforehand. I don't know if I've ever written a song where I knew what the meaning was, what the song was about beforehand. Sometimes I hate giving songs titles because I feel like it locks in the meaning. And I think, especially with instrumental jazz, so much of it is so broadly interpretable that I hesitate to give anything a title because I don't want to cut off the interpretive options. You know, I want people to hear what they want to hear and what they hear in it. But you know, every song also has a certain mood, and you know, so I usually try to use titles to kind of capture what I think the mood might be. Actually, the title to that is not Insomniac, but it's Insomnomaniac, which is not a word, but it's.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, no,
okay.
But it's. I mean, you know, insomnia is something that I've struggled with, and more and more. You know, more and more over the past 10 years, So
the change from the sort of desperation in one movement and then the grogginess that follows.
Yeah, but it's never, you know, sleep is, when you're struggling with insomnia, sleep is never a relaxing, natural thing, you know, even when you're groggy, you know. And I mean, a lot of the issue with insomnia is, you know, this just, you know, hyper awareness and anxiety surrounding sleep. I mean, sleep is something that you can't try to do. It's something that you allow to happen. But of course, as you have more and more trouble with it, you lose perspective on you know, you're trying too hard and you're worrying too much about it. So, you know, there's that tune is built obviously around a very insistent, recurring, very, very hectic, anxious rhythm. And actually what happens is, from a technical standpoint, even though the same thing keeps happening over and over again, an eighth note is added here or taken away there. So not to get too technical, but the meter shifts every bar and becomes very complicated. It's like 15/8 and then 16/8 and then 13/8. You know, so it's this sense of, you know, the same thing going on all the time but never settling. You know, so I thought that was an appropriate title.
What brought you to the idea of two basses and two drummers?
You know, it was an idea that I had not long before doing the record. I mean, I had booked the session. I knew that I wanted to play with those two bassists and those two drummers, with Reuben Rogers, Larry Grenadier, they're the bassists, and Brian Blade and Gregory Hutchinson are the drummers. And they're, you know, four of the greatest musicians I've ever played with, and I've played with all of them a lot, so that, you know, it was kind of a family thing. But I wanted to play with each of them in individual trio combinations. You know, a tune with Reuben and Brian, a tune with Reuben and Greg, a tune with Larry and Brian, a tune with Larry and Greg. But this idea of doing things with multiple bassists, with two bassists and two drummers, kind of came to me a few months before the session. And you know, it was this idea, and I initially just kind of rejected it out of hand. You know, my brain said, absolutely not. You know, this is going to be a big mess. But I guess my instinct, my gut, you know, it just kept coming back. And it was really, it wasn't in any way like a plan or a vision or really a concept. It was almost a question for me.
Are you aware of anyone using this instrumentation?
I'm aware of a number of, I mean, there have been quite a few examples of two drummers and two bass players in jazz. And the only example I can think of that has two bass players and two drummers is Ornette Coleman
The
double quartet, free jazz, which also has, but it has four horn players. It has, so there's a certain balance.
There's one other that there's a few tracks of Stan Getz's Jazz Samba.
That has two drummers and two bassists.
Basses, yeah.
Wow. Okay, I got to check that out. Yeah.
Let me play a little bit of the standard from this piece, and I won't say anything else about it. This is with both basses and both drummers.
That was more than an excerpt.
I didn't have the heart to stop that one.
That was...
Talk about that.
I really was not going to put that on the record. And even now, it's, I almost wish I hadn't.
Why?
The reason why is because, we were talking about, virtuoso before and kind of execution. And this performance is kind of the antithesis of virtuoso in the sense that, like, in terms of my performance, it's just riddled with flaws. And in particular, like, my tone isn't, it's wavering, my intonation is very bad at times. There's a kind of, my tone is weak at times. I mean, basically there's so many areas of weakness and imperfection that, normally I would have said, no way am I gonna put something like that on one of my records. Like, I can sound like that on someone else's record, but, you think, your record, you wanna sound good. You wanna sound like a good saxophone player. And to me, like, there's so many areas, it's like I still wince when I hear that note that's out of tune. Oh my God. But I think the reason why I ended up putting it on the record, well, it's a pretty good piece of music. It's also, I felt like it...
Does the Moonlight Sonata have some particular meaning for you? Or?
No. I mean, this actually started as an exercise. And the exercise was, I have very little, the one form of music that I have the least experience with listening, never played it, is classical music. And I've always appreciated it, but I really have listened to very little of it. And recently, when I say recently, over the past couple years, I've started to get into it a lot more and starting to listen to it more. And one thing that, one of the many things that really intrigues me about classical music is the harmonic world. The command that classical composers have over harmony and harmonic movement, and the possibilities that they deal with. And so one thing that I have done a little bit of has been kind of try to transcribe by ear some classical pieces, and but not like not the whole, not transcribe everything, but try to try to kind of learn the melody and the harmony. And one exercise that I was working on with this was trying to, I found the movement very compelling, as many other people have as well. That's why it's such a famous piece in the repertoire. But I was trying to I felt it was a great opportunity to kind of learn some classical harmony, because one, I think it's beautiful, and the way Beethoven kind of just slowly but surely creates this drama. It's like this epic unfolding, but patient unfolding of harmony. Also, it's slow, so it was easier for me to transcribe something that's slow. So it started as an exercise. Basically, what I was trying to do was distill the harmony into 3 notes, 3 or 4 notes, a melody, and then the roots and the guiding tones. And so I was kind of working on that, and then I had this. Then, independent of that, I had this notion of doing this thing with the 2 bassists, 2 drummers, and those projects kind of fused because, well, lo and behold, if you've got a saxophone and 2 basses, you've got 3 voices. So I basically was transcribing it and writing it out for 3 voices, and And I kind of had this 3-voice arrangement, and I brought it into the band, and we played it, did a couple takes in the studio, and really didn't think I was going to use it. But I think the main reason I used it is it just seemed to fit with the rest of the record because of the vulnerability of it. You know, I think I was, for some reason with this record, I felt like I was able to show a side of myself as a musician that I had always, you know, tried to sweep under the rug, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think intonation problems aside, first of all, you play a part of the tenor that we rarely get to hear. I mean, it's a very delicate, high sound that you have really worked on. Mm-hmm. And I think the vulnerability, there's an emotional urgency, which sometimes your music is so fastidious and so clean, that this is, I think this, especially within the context of the whole album.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's all right. I mean, this is painful for me to have to, I mean, I can't listen to any of my own music, especially shortly after I've done a record, and then in front of a live studio audience. This is my form of hell. No offense.
We're going to save a little time for questions, and there are microphones on the side, so, but before we go there, I wanted to ask you a question about the Agony of Influence, and this time I will play only a small excerpt because I think this is Round Reuben. Mm-hmm. We hear a little bit of, I think, the Sonny Rollins. Nope, wrong track. Wait a second. That's a good one too. Soprano. Here we go. Bit of Tenor Madness in that?
Yeah. I never really thought about that until, I mean, I basically bit the whole first 4 notes from Tenor Madness, right? You caught me. I mean, stuff like that happens all the time, especially with me. I think, like, eventually, you know, when I'm writing a tune, I think it's like some burst of inspiration, and then I realize I'm just reinventing the wheel.
I thought it was deliberate.
No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. But someone else told me they thought it sounded like Moose the Mooch, which is also true. So, but Tenor Madness, I mean, yeah, the first 7 notes of Tenor Madness. Yeah. So, yeah. But it wasn't deliberate.
A couple of things there. You like doing exchanges.
Exchanges meaning?
With musicians, with other guys on the bandstand.
Oh, you mean trades, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You did a whole track with your father on the last album, which there's a lot of that. Mm-hmm. And recently you did an amazing concert with Brad Meldau. That seems to bring out something.
I mean, I think, like I was saying before, you know, I mean, jazz today is really based on collective interaction. You know, the best jazz is really everybody listening and responding to each other at the same time. And so all jazz musicians deal with that. But I've always felt that, in a certain sense, that's all I have. if I, every good idea that I have when I'm improvising comes from someone else, you know? I mean, I feel like, in a certain sense, if I don't have that conversation, if I don't have that inspiration coming from the other musicians I'm playing with, then I have nothing. Like, I mean, and honestly, when I don't feel like that rapport is there, I really can't play, you know? I don't have this great body of material that I have to fall back on when I don't have that, you know? I mean, many players do. They have their arsenal, you know, their arsenal. They've got their licks and their phrases. And I mean, this is a compliment. I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. I mean, they have all these things that they can, it's theirs, and they can pull those out whenever they need to, and they're going to sound strong and brilliant. But I've never felt like I had that. What I have is a ability, a desire to be in the moment and to have that conversation, to have that interaction with other musicians. So I do rely on that. It's almost a crutch for me, but I think that's one of the reasons why I tend to emphasize those things in my writing and in performances.
Are there any questions?
I was curious about your initial statement about being apolitical, and I was just wondering what is your rationale for being an apolitical artist, and if that's what you want to call yourself. And also in Back East, Zarify, I think that's the tune. Can you give us some background into that particular piece?
Sure. You know, I mean, perhaps I misspoke a little when I said that I'm apolitical. Maybe that's too strong a way to put it. There's no rationale. I just generally don't feel comfortable taking an explicit political or social or economic or any sort of stance or intellectual stance as a musician outside of the music, because I rarely feel that my music explicitly expresses any one viewpoint or stance. So I don't write music like that. I don't play music like that when I play. I think all of those things are in there. You know, what I believe, what I feel, what I think is in my music, but it goes through so many. It's not conscious and explicit. It's not like I have this idea, I take this position, and I write a song about it. You know, or I'm feeling this, and so, or I'm thinking this, and so I'm going to play it. You know, my music isn't message oriented in that sense. So because I think it all gets in there, but in a very kind of indirect, subconscious way, and so I think because of that, I generally don't feel like I can, you know, I feel like I play my music and it is what it is. And, you know, I want to leave it interpretable to people, you know, however they choose to interpret it.
There's a musically political aspect in the sense that at the time you were born, there was this big schism in jazz between mainstream playing, the bebop tradition, and the avant-garde. Your father was right in the middle of it. That doesn't seem to have any role in your music or your generation. You go out when you want to go out. You go inside when you want to go inside. There's no religious loyalty to one, and that's new. That's a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There was. I mean, I feel like when I kind of came on the scene, there was it was more ideological, you know, in terms of your approach to jazz, and especially your approach to jazz vis-a-vis the tradition. You know, you're either with, you're either with the tradition or you're against the tradition. You're either playing the tradition or you're an innovator. You know, and I never really bought into that kind of dichotomy. Yeah, I mean, some of my, many of my, maybe most of, no, not most, many of my favorite musicians within jazz and outside of jazz have been, at different times in their lives and careers, explicitly political.
Do you specifically, and other musicians that you hang with and know well, do you listen historically to jazz before the Coltrane Rollins generation?
Absolutely.
You go through it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't just listen historically. I listen, personally. I mean, yeah, it's not. I don't listen historically in the sense that I'm listening to this. I'm listening to Lester Young or Ben Webster because I need to understand the tradition. I mean, for me, the music of Louis Armstrong or the music of Lester Young or Ben Webster, it is compelling and speaks to me in the present. I mean, for me, all great music and all great jazz music, it's not about the history of it first and foremost. It's about the presence of it. I think you listen to Charlie Parker and he speaks to you as if he's playing now. It sounds wholly relevant to me. Same with Louis Armstrong. It doesn't. I mean, yes, you can trace it and understand how that was the historical source of everything that came after, but it means as much, I think, to me now as music of made by people playing today.
Do you ever find yourself discovering somebody you had overlooked and saying, "Wow, that's something I can use"? Or
yeah, all the time. I mean, I feel like there's so much music that I haven't checked out, and probably more of the pre-bop stuff than bop and after. I mean, there's a lot of like I have very little experience listening to New Orleans jazz. I mean, I've listened to Louis Armstrong's music, but I don't know a lot of early New Orleans jazz. I don't know Jelly Roll Morton's music very well. That's a whole area that I would like to explore. But there's a lot of areas to explore.
I'm reminded of I was visiting Ted Curson, the trumpet player who worked with Mingus and Cecil Taylor, and I went to visit him, and he had just gotten the Smithsonian big box of classic jazz. And when he first started, a lot of reviewers were comparing him to King Oliver, which he couldn't make head or tail of because he had never heard.
Right.
King Oliver. And he was so ecstatic finally listening to King Oliver and saying, "I know what they meant."
Yeah.
When you were at the Monk thing, I remember one of the musicians, I think it was Richard Wyans, went on a tear backstage because nobody today knew who Don Byas was.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that experience before. People that, especially early on when I got to New York, people were like, "Oh yeah, man, you sound like you checked out a bunch of Johnny Griffin." And I was like, "Yeah, I love Johnny Griffin, but I really haven't." And I remember Johnny Griffin and Sonny Stitt. People kept saying,
"Really?"
Yeah, and I was like, "No, Sonny Rollins and Coltrane." But that's the thing. People here, there is no, for me, especially with jazz. There is, the meaning is you make the meaning. I don't make the meaning of the music that I play.
Are you conscious of having your own sound?
What does that mean?
Is there some point when you know what Sonny Rollins' sound is, what Coltrane sound is?
Yes, but not, but not in the way that Sonny Rollins or Coltrane. Yes. For me, people act as if, or people speak sometimes as if, finding your sound is like this epic quest. You know, like I gotta find my sound. When am I gonna find my sound? I mean, it's
like a bad movie.
Yeah. I've never thought about it like that. I mean, I've always felt like I had my own sound, oftentimes to my detriment. Like I don't like my sound, you know, but I have it. I mean, much of my early life in music has been trying to run away from my own sound. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I think everyone has their own sound. I mean, unless you are going through a stage where you are explicitly, you know, trying to just sound like somebody else, you know. I tried that like for a couple days and realized I couldn't do it, you know. But for me, like, it's not, your own sound it's there, you know. It's a matter of kind of uncovering it, but it's not like a matter of this great search. So, yes. But I also feel like your sound is constantly evolving, you know, and it's very malleable. It's not a fixed quantity, you know. And, you know, I mean, I listen to, if I'm forced to listen to stuff that I did in 91 or 92, 93, I mean, sometimes one time someone put something on, I was like, who's that? Oh, yeah. I mean, my sound has changed a lot, you know, and that's kind of how I want it to be. You know, maybe if I find maybe if my sound ever sounds the way I want it to, then I'll like say, okay, I found my sound.
We'll go back to that in a second, but
I'm actually glad you mentioned that because I was thinking of Miles, and he didn't have a fixed sound. I mean, people tend to listen to him way back, and anything that happened in the 70s, they don't even refer to it as jazz, which isn't fair.
But I'm sorry, I don't mean to
no.
interrupt you, but but I am.
Yeah, go.
But I think Miles is actually a great example of someone who had, if anyone had a fixed sound in terms of their sound and their personality on their instrument, Miles is about as close to it as you could come. Is that what you were saying? Or
well,
but the style in which the context in which that
surrounded that sound. The sound was
changed.
his sound, but
Yeah.
it just everything else around him was changing.
Yeah.
And to that effect, he inevitably worked with hip hop artists. And I was wondering what your thoughts were about the relationship between jazz and hip hop.
I mean, I think it's a wonderful relationship, a very strong relationship. You know, I don't think you can be a jazz musician who, you know, came of age in the 80s or later and not have been heavily influenced by hip-hop music. You know, in terms of direct, explicit, I use this word a lot, I don't know why, collaborations, you know, fusions, that's a loaded term, but attempts to synthesize, syntheses
yeah.
of jazz and hip-hop. I think there have been some great examples, and as in most syntheses, some not great examples. You know, it's not something that I've tackled yet. I'm not sure that I will. One of the very, very difficult things to reconcile with jazz and hip-hop has been to bring in the free-flowing, the really fluid aspect of jazz improvisation, in particular, harmonically and rhythmically, to be able to bring that into the hip-hop framework without weakening the hip-hop. You know, I think a lot of times what happens is, I mean, this is very. This is a big generalization, but sometimes what happens is you get some what ends up sounding like constricted or uptight jazz and some weak ass hip hop. You know, I mean, it's like there's something like hip hop rhythms and that kind of insistence. You know, the repetitive insistence, the power of hip-hop, which, you know, is driven most of the time by samples and by drum machines. It's often that it's very hard to get an improvisational flow over a long period of time with that, which is somehow paradoxical because the flow that and phrasing that a lot of great rappers have is akin to that of jazz musicians, you know? I mean, I always felt certain rappers, I mean, I think of someone like Q-Tip. To me, he has very, very jazz phrasing, but somehow that it's not the phrasing of the lead voice. It's the concept in jazz of this kind of fluid collective interaction. That's very difficult to reconcile.
Let me just, next question, let me just play a few bars of something in this vein. Okay, this is from a long time ago,
Yeah.
but you have been involved in bringing aspects of pop and funk and blues into jazz. I mean, some people have been hitting you over the head for doing that.
I mean, I feel like a lot of my phrasing comes from, comes from hip hop, comes from funk, comes from soul, music that I listened to growing up, for sure. But it's the stylistic. I've never felt comfortable doing something that I would call a hip hop jazz project. But a lot of the drummers that I play with really have a strong hip hop foundation. And even when they're not playing funk music or hip hop, you can feel it. You can feel it in even when they're playing swing. You feel that bounce.
Good question.
Wow, thanks Gary again for playing that song. That's the song that I started listening to Joshua Redman in 2005 when I was introduced to jazz. I'm a South African kid from the gutters of Soweto, Johannesburg, and when I got here, you went down there to perform. Mm-hmm. So I just want to find out, as we know, jazz is an intimate music with the audience and the musicians that you play with. So with you, how was the reception when you were performing down there in South Africa compared to other parts of the world?
Yeah, it was. I'm glad you asked that. It was wonderful, and also it was wonderful, and also like. It was surprising, and there was something. How do I describe this? The reception was so. People were so enthusiastic and so expressive and so vocal in their reception. The audience was just like there was this constant kind of. There were these outbursts, mostly positive, but also this kind of constant, this bubbling conversation, I mean, here in America and in Europe, and especially oftentimes in Japan, we're used to this, there's this certain etiquette, that goes along with the performance, You walk on stage, people clap, whatever, and then, you play your tune, and then people clap, you take a solo, people clap after solos, and then, at the end of the song, they clap, and, I mean, there's whooping and hollering, but it takes place, according to these prescribed rules, I mean, if someone's really feeling it, they'll yell out, yell something out in the middle of a solo or something. But, people basically sit their butts in their chairs and, are silent, whereas there it was like, people were constantly talking, but it was like a really great positive energy, and it made me think that, in certain ways, jazz has kind of been distanced from maybe some of its origins in terms of its relationship to the audience and to the community. Because I mean, obviously I wasn't around, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, but I have this sense that maybe there was more of that, a kind of less formal presentation.
Right. A lot of people who were around and part of that are upset about the obligatory clapping. It's
Right.
like tipping for bad service.
Right.
You're supposed to clap when the solo knocks your socks off.
Right. But also this conception, assumption that of silence, like I think jazz musicians today.
Like it's a church.
Yeah, I mean we're used to playing. There's this. We're so used to playing where people are basically silent, and so there was something disconcerting about the fact that there was always this energy from the audience, kind of always this conversation happening, and that I think it was really great to experience that, because at first I think we all kind of were like, this is great, but it was very hard to focus. But after a few tunes, we kind of were able to feel. In a certain sense, it was less formal and more intimate and more communicative. Yeah, more of a sense of community.
From the time that you came out with your first album, you pretty much maintained a career as a leader without doing too many sideman gigs, the exception being the SF Jazz. I'm wondering if you could perhaps explain how you've been able to sustain for so long being a leader when many other people from your generation haven't been able to continue or build a career that way in concert halls as leaders, and perhaps discuss also the experiences within the SF Jazz Octet for the 3 or 4 years, different than being a leader.
I'm just going to amend that by saying you've done a lot of sideman gigs.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, it's been very important for me to. I mean, when I first got to New York, I did only sideman gigs, and actually there was a short period of time where I was getting pressure from various people to, you got to go out there and lead your own band, you got to do this, and I was like, I kind of staved that off for a little while. For me, it's really, really important to be able to play with as many great musicians as possible and to learn as much as possible from them. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to do some of that, quite a bit of that as a leader, because I've been able to hire a bunch of musicians way better than I am, and to learn on the bandstand from them. But I've also really sought out opportunities to do it as a sideman. I haven't had the opportunity to go on the road, well, for the past 10 years, I haven't had the opportunity to go on the road extensively as a sideman with somebody else. But I've had an opportunity to record and do gigs here and there. And
What was the Bud Powell band like?
You mean the Chick Corea's band?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great band. I mean, the chance to play with Chick Corea and Roy Haynes. It was Chick Corea, Roy Haynes, Christian McBride, and Wallace Roney, and these all incredible musicians. For me, the chance to play with Chick, both with Chick and with Roy, and then to get to play with Chick and Roy together, because Chick and Roy is one of the great partnerships, in jazz. I mean, the Chick's, he'd hate it if I said this because so many people say it, and he once told me, why does everyone always talk about Now He Sings, Now He Sobs? But there's a record he did called Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, which is one of, arguably his greatest. It's arguably the record his most influential record, and I mean that's one record that when I heard it, it completely changed the way I thought about jazz, and that's Chick Corea and Roy Haynes, and it's because of their interaction, and they continue to have that to this day.
But you would hate it if the rest of your life people always talked about a record from 1994.
Yeah, I would. but if it was that great, maybe I wouldn't hate it.
One more question we have.
I don't know. I mean, you take whatever conditions are. The conditions are, you have a certain budget, you have a certain studio, you have certain musicians, and you try to use those conditions, those parameters, to create an environment in which the greatest amount of creativity can happen. And you also you have to accept that. First of all, you have to accept and embrace the notion that studio is not live and will never be live, and to try to capture what you do live in the studio, I feel like that's impossible. So you have to approach the studio for what it is. It's a certain environment, and it lacks a lot of things that a live performance environment has, but it also it offers a lot of other things. And I don't know what the answer is other than you do it, and see what you come up with.
There's one thing that hasn't changed in 70, 80 years, and that is that Duke Ellington will go into the studio with new music, and they'll kill. Mm-hmm. But 6 months later, after he's played it on the road, those records sound like rehearsals.
Right.
And I've seen that happen with you back east.
Right.
I mean, and 6 months later, when you were playing some of that stuff live, it was like...
Right. But sometimes the case will be that I think that there's sometimes this golden moment where you know the music well enough and feel comfortable with the music well enough that you feel completely free with it and completely creative. You're not constrained by by whatever the parameters and the difficulties of the music are. You can float through it. You can express through it. But it's still something close to the way you were originally intended it. What I'm saying is that what happens is you write music, you play it with the band, and you become more and more familiar with it, and you become more and more free with it and creative with it. But at the same time, you start to deconstruct it, and you can, if you play a tune for long enough, you can start to, in order to keep feeling creative with it, you're constantly recombining it and tearing things down, and then you can end up with something that bears very little resemblance to the original intent, emotional and intellectual intent. And I think sometimes there's this golden moment where it's the perfect balance between the two. I don't know if I've ever caught that.
I think you've caught it a number of times, and I want to thank you for coming here,
Gary.
and thank everybody.